Martin. The awards honor writers in nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and young people's literature. Oprah Winfrey will also be on hand to receive a special award. Join us tonight at 8 Eastern here on C-SPAN 2. Now, Hell to Pay, the unfolding story of Hillary Rodham Clinton by former federal prosecutor Barbara Olson. In this critical biography, Ms. Olson traces the First Lady's life from her politically active college days to her current candidacy for the United States Senate. She spoke at the Independent Women's Forum in Washington, D.C. for about an hour.
Good evening. Welcome to the Independent Women's Forum Speaker Series. I'm Anita Blair, President of the Independent Women's Forum. Tonight we're especially pleased and proud to be able to present Barbara Olson, who I first met on June 23rd, 1992. I know that date because it was the very first of our speaker series, and that's when we met. Barbara was a founder of the Independent Women's Forum, and both she and the Independent Women's Forum have come a long way since 1992. Barbara has been a regularly featured guest on our panels, and particularly in the recent series that we've sponsored called The Law, the Spin, the Moral Consequences. There was a standing room only crowd here in September 1998, and I'm sure hundreds more people saw it on C-SPAN, judging from the calls and emails that we got when Barbara Olson was here and said, "We are beyond spin. Cover-ups and disinformation go to the core of our government and our Constitution." We think it's a very important subject, and we're delighted to be able to present Barbara Olson to talk about it. She is uniquely qualified to do so, having been experienced as the Chief Investigative Counsel of the House Government Reform Committee. And in that capacity, she investigated both Travelgate and Filegate scandals. She's turned that experience into a compelling and fascinating new book, Hell to Pay, the unfolding story of Hillary Rodham Clinton. We have many copies in the back, and for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to purchase it, we will have them available, and after the talk and the Q&A session this evening, I know Barbara will be happy to sign a few copies. But it's a terrific book, and you really need to have it. Barbara was responsible for drawing out the truth surrounding the scandals known as Travelgate and Filegate. Now, speaking truth to power is a common catchphrase of the feminist hard left, but it's a useful catchphrase, and it's one that we deserve to take up ourselves. In fact, if there is anybody who has spoken truth to power, who has championed right over might, who has defended the rule of law against the rule of men, it is our own Barbara Olson. So please welcome our fearless fact finder and favorite forum founder, Barbara Olson.
Thank you, Anita. You're right. Boy, it seems like a long time. I mean, the Independent Women's Forum was literally founded around a small table with a bag of potato chips and Diet Pepsi, and I see we've come a long way. We have cookies and coffee, so we've at least moved to the dessert era. I thought I'd give you a little more background on why I decided to write a book on Hillary Clinton. I was Chief Investigative Counsel in the House. I went there. I spent about 3 years in the United States government working as an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia, and as a prosecutor in the District of Columbia. I had about 49 jury trials, and I like to stay in trials, so I did a lot of drug cases and felony drug trials in the District of Columbia. I went to the House and started in the House as principal deputy counsel, and then went over to work for Chairman Klinger when he was starting to investigate the travel office firings. And as with most investigations, we started to look at the administration to see if there was wrongdoing within the administration. And we requested documents, as congressional committees have done for hundreds of years, and we were met with claims of executive privilege. I know this is fairly familiar, anyone who's heard of the independent counsel, but we received, I think, the first executive privileges of the Clinton administration. We had documents that were completely white. We got blank pages when we did get deliveries. Finally, at one point, we received documents concerning the travel office firings. And as a short background on the travel office firings, these were career employees that were summarily fired, which every president has a right to do. However, in firing these employees, what happened was the FBI was called and there was an investigation announced that date. And these individuals were under criminal investigation by the FBI. This was a break from tradition. First of all, the FBI does not announce investigations. This was announced from the White House, which was also unique. And these were individuals that had worked in the White House, some for as long as 35 years, through numerous administrations. So we started getting documents, and finally we received documents concerning the president's involvement in the travel office. And when people say they were out of the loop, the president was basically out of the loop for the firing of the travel office employees. What we soon found out was that the road was leading right to Hillary Clinton. We didn't intend it to, we weren't looking there, but we kept finding evidence and documents of HRC, her initials pressure. Hillary wants them out. Hillary says, we need the slots, we need our people in and their people out. And sooner or later we found that indeed there were numerous documents after we had to hold the White House counsel in contempt for not turning over documents. And the contempt that we held him for was not turning over Hillary documents. The documents that the chairman had seen would say blank chronology. When we saw the actual document, it was Hillary Clinton chronology. We assumed it was going to be the president's chronology. That obviously raised people's question about what was going on here. And you may wonder about the title. The title is Hell to Pay, and it came out of travel office. David Watkins was the head of the Office of Administration. He was someone who had worked with the Clintons for years back in Little Rock. He had been a successful ad man, worked on the campaign. However, in the White House, things began to change, and in January of '96, he wrote a memo that disappeared for many months. When we found it, this memo was written to Mac McLarty, who was then the chief of staff. And the words are wonderful. He said, "We both knew there would be hell to pay if, after our failure in the Secret Service situation earlier, we failed to take swift and decisive action in conformity with the First Lady's wishes." Well, that memo stuck in my mind, and when I started to write this book, I realized there had been so much hell to pay by so many people in this White House, and that the real crimes against people were committed when they dared to cross the First Lady's wishes. The Clinton administration came in, and the firings were not just the travel office employees. You all may remember that a White House usher was fired, Chris Emery, when he dared to talk to Barbara Bush about her computer. The switchboard ladies were fired who operated the telephones. The correspondence ladies were removed. The kitchen chef, the kitchen help was removed. The Secret Service was moved out of the residence. Cameras were taken down. There was a total turnover. And at one point in my book, I do talk about the conspiracy feeling that the Clinton administration had. And of course, it came full circle when we all saw Hillary Clinton sit there and claim that there was a vast right-wing conspiracy, which was in protestation of anyone that would accuse her husband of the allegations that were later proven to be true. Anyway, after the travel office investigation, we were receiving documents. One evening, one of the people who worked with me was going through some of the documents that had finally come in, and she made a comment. She said, "Well, this is strange." 2 hours later, she went back to the document and said, "You know, it's very odd, but the White House is requesting Billy Dale, who was head of the travel office, his file. And they're requesting it 6 months after he's been fired." Well, it wasn't strange. It was not one of 900 Republican files that had been requested. And that started what we had was the FBI files investigation. And during that investigation, it was obviously very sensitive because you've got files that are probably the most sensitive information on individuals. They have innuendo, every neighbor's claim that you take the garbage out at odd hours, to the fact that they don't generally like your pets is in there. And we started with the person who was keeping those files, who was a man named Craig Livingstone. And we were getting no answers. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of publicity. It became sort of a mantra of who hired Craig Livingstone, because this was a man that seemed to sort of appear in the White House in a very responsible position in the Office of Security, and no one hired him. There were finger pointing. Everyone said someone else hired him. Well, while we were trying to just find out who hired the man that was supposed to have asked for the files, I got a call from the FBI. And they asked me to come over immediately to headquarters. And being a little bit suspicious at this point, I waited. And I finally went over to headquarters, and they asked me to sit down. And they said, I want you to look at an FBI file. Now, I obviously, after being in the Justice Department, I knew these are private, and you're not allowed to look at FBI files. This had gotten approvals. And the FBI file was Craig Livingstone. And within his file, when he was vetted for his position by the FBI agent went to various individuals that were in the administration, including then White House counsel Bernard Nussbaum. And what the FBI agent had written down in the file was, why is Craig Livingstone coming to the White House? And the response was, Hillary wants him hired. Well, this we had not had. None of us had even dreamed she also was going to be involved in the FBI files. What we then found, I called the chairman, because this was obviously information, since the First Lady had denied any knowledge whatsoever, not only of the White House firing in the travel office, but she also denied knowing who Craig Livingstone was. So I called the chairman, and come to find out that the White House had already been notified of this event, and they were already on it, and that's why they were so panicked for someone from Congress in charge of the investigation to come and look at a file that they had already given a heads up to the White House. I sort of bring this up to say that it became obvious in our investigation that we were looking at a series of incidents that were directed and clearly orchestrated by the First Lady. That's unusual, as most of you know. The First Lady's office usually has wonderful programs. They are sort of the soft side of the White House, and they see that they have a beautification project like Mrs. Johnson had. Mrs. Reagan worked on drug abuse. But Hillary Clinton was there with the White House counsel's office, very involved in policy. I then went over to the Senate and did the China investigation, thinking, well, this is going to be an investigation into the administration. Well, soon we found Maggie Williams, the First Lady's chief of staff, accepting checks, the First Lady giving tours to Chinese donors, coffees, and she was once again involved in another scandal in this administration. So at that point, I thought that I would look at her background, her writings, and see who she is, because I think she's very much responsible for the success of Bill Clinton philosophically. I think he's probably one of the best politicians insofar as a politician remembers people and communicates. And I found a lot of his ideology comes directly from her programs and her plans. And certainly we saw that up front with the healthcare task force. The healthcare task force was another issue. Obviously, Hillary was behind it, and we had to go through the issue whether she was a government employee or not a government employee. She was, and that, of course, then caused a lot of problems, because once you're a government employee, you have ethics rules that you have to abide by. It's a road that I think is important, because no one has looked at Hillary Clinton as a political individual. We've had a lot of books on their marriage, a lot of books on Bill Clinton, a lot of books on scandals, but no one has really looked at her as a serious political candidate. And the more I read of her writings and the more I looked at what she had done in Arkansas, I realized that this was a person who clearly had a serious agenda. Bill Clinton had been an excellent vehicle for that agenda, but that there was a future there. She spent quite a few years traveling around the world, and I looked at what she was going to do, because I don't think Hillary Clinton does anything without purpose. And her trips were to a lot of third world countries and areas that first ladies do not normally attend. And it became clear that she was setting up a resume and a background to run for office. In the middle of writing my book, Hillary announced that she was thinking about running for Senate from New York. And a lot seemed to fall in place. Not that that was the greatest place to run from, because clearly I think her home state of Illinois would have been a much easier run. New York was there, and I think New York also offers a national platform. You can run from that state and garner national attention like no other state offers. And so I think part of that is why she is running. The other part was she obviously was the first victim. Her polls were high. People were surrounding her. She was getting a lot of good feedback, and I think that started her candidacy. But Hillary Clinton's candidacy in New York, I don't think, is her end-all to her career. It's pretty clear that Hillary has other ideas. And what I thought she was going to do and where she was headed with her travels around the world was a foreign policy position. Hillary has been very mindful of her career, and a foreign policy position would really allow a candidate, especially a woman, to run for the presidency from a unique position that most candidates don't have. With that kind of strength, she would be powerful, especially with the grassroots and feminist backing that she's always had. And one story that I found in research, you turn up the strangest things, was that Hillary was telling how at one point she wanted to join the Marines. And I looked at it and I thought, Hillary Clinton, who had protested the Vietnam War, had gone underground in the left in law school, had been on the real hard ideological left, suddenly wants to become one of a few good men. And to put this in a little perspective, Hillary decided to try, or says she decided to try to join the Marines after law school. She was teaching at the University of Arkansas with her beau, Bill Clinton. She planned on marrying him. She knew he was going to run for office, and she goes into the local, her story is that she goes into the local Marine office and asks to sign up. Now, her story is that they turned her down because of her myopia, that her eyesight wasn't good, and her age. First of all, I query whether an eyesight was a criteria. Other Marines have told me it was not a criteria at the time, that women were not put in the trenches, and so they didn't have an eyesight criteria. And certainly she was a law school graduate. In the JAG Corps, I think they're pretty used to lawyers having bad eyesight. But you have to look at it very seriously. Her friends have said this is sort of a fanciful lark. And Hillary is not a fanciful person. She's very directive. She's very serious about her agenda. And I really think she decided at that point that this was a story who would not only help her if Bill Clinton ran, she knew about his problems with the military, about draft dodging. This would give a sort of a mitigating story to tell when that came up. And I think she also figured in her own career that it was a wonderful story to tell, that maybe she had protested the Vietnam War, maybe she had attended Black Panther trials, maybe she had worked for the Communist Party lawyer, but she wanted to be a Marine. That is sort of an unanswered question, but it's those kinds of things that I thought were important to put down in a book and to put one place so that people can really see who Hillary Clinton is, because so much of what we hear about her is her service to her country and her caring for children. And I think that's something we all agree with, that children are the future generation, and there's a lot of things we can do in this country to better the children's lives. If you go back and read her writings, which are numerous about children, you see that her caring for children really extends to using them as political levers. Whenever Hillary has a position on welfare, pollution, crime control, she quite often will use that it's for children and that these policies really are for the children. And it's very difficult, as everyone in Washington knows, to be against someone when they say it's for children, because then you are evil and you are against children. And I think that has worked very well. But one of the things from her writing that really stopped me when I was researching her views on children was in an essay that she wrote. She said, decisions about motherhood, abortion, schooling, cosmetic surgery, treatment of venereal disease, or employment where the decision or lack of one will significantly affect the child's future should not be made unilaterally by the parents. If the parents aren't going to make these decisions on children, who is? Well, if it's going to be by someone else, we're going to have to insert a government advocate into the family. And we all know what happens once a government advocate is inserted. We no longer have the traditional American family. We really have the village that Hillary talks about. We have a family that has the social workers and the teachers and the pediatricians inserted into the decision-making of the family unit. I think this is a very good example of a policy that she can color being for the children, which is not for children and not for the future of this country as we want it to be. And it's a philosophy of family socialism. It comes out of her 60s roots. It was carried throughout the 70s, and it was implemented in Arkansas when she was helping Bill Clinton in his re-election. And people have said, well, you know, a lot of kids were 60s radicals. You know, they grew their hair long and they didn't go to class. But this involvement, the more you look at her background, and what I tried to lay out was this was not just a frivolous protester. This was a woman who really studied under some of the hardest ideological gurus of the left. I talk a great deal about Saul Alinsky, and indeed I open all of my chapters with a quote from Saul Alinsky. He was an organizer of radicals. He wrote a book, Rules for Radicals, which I quote from in my book a great deal. And the reason I used it was the more I read Saul Alinsky, the more I really saw that the Clinton war room and Hillary Clinton's way of dealing with opposition comes right from Saul Alinsky. And I'll give you a bit of a quick example. Saul Alinsky really disdained the SDS students and the students who were growing their hair long and just scaring the bejesus out of most of America. He said that was the wrong way to gain power and revolution. And Saul Alinsky's #1 position is any means justify an ends to gaining power. Instead, what he recommended to Hillary and others who listened to him was that you use your middle class roots, that indeed you infiltrate and you change from within. After Hillary finished her thesis with the mentoring of Saul Alinsky, he offered her a job and she turned it down to go to law school. And I think if you follow her career and look at her writings and her work, she successfully internalized those rules for radical revolution. And it's a soft revolution, and I think it's important that people be able to ask questions of Hillary Clinton, questions we never could ask before because she was a first lady. Now she's put herself out there as a candidate, and if her positions have changed, if she wants programs for children, I think it's time for her to answer these questions, her to respond, her to talk about the fact that she did indeed work for someone who was very involved in the Communist Party. She hasn't renounced that alliance. Maybe she believes she has, but I think the American people, before they consider electing her or before she is appointed to a position of power, I think this kind of information needed to be gathered. And so I decided to undertake it, like I said, from Travelgate and Filegate on to the United States Senate. And before I talk too long, it's warm in here, I thought I would see if anybody had any questions or any suggestions or any comments. Thank you. Yes?
What do you think is going to happen with Travelgate and Filegate? Are they finished completely?
Well, it's interesting because Hillary Clinton answered written questions from our committee. I had a hand in drafting them, and she signed the answers under oath and penalty of perjury, which at the time we thought that was an extremely solemn action to be taken. And when we obtained evidence that was in direct conflict with her statements, i.e. she said she had nothing to do with the firings, she didn't know who hired Craig Livingston, we put the individuals under oath in testimony, congressional testimony and depositions. They directly refuted her statements, so there was a criminal referral. And it went to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General handed it off to the independent counsel. And up to this point, the independent counsel, Ken Starr's report that he delivered to Congress encapsulated all of the possible wrongdoing and crimes by the president that might lead to impeachment. Any findings on the First Lady, from the Whitewater billing records in the residence to the interrogatories that she answered under oath to the rest of the China investigation, has not been done, and that sits with the independent counsel. Now, the other problem that we have is the independent counsel is in an environment that we're all too aware of, an environment where the American people have denied, that perjury is a serious offense, and they certainly classified perjury about certain topics not being justifying removal. And so a prosecutor has to look at that. They have to decide, not only do I have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, and I always required evidence beyond any doubt in my mind, even though Janet Reno says that's not what they have to look at the likelihood of success. And if you're going to bring an action against the First Lady, every prosecutor knows you've got to have a very high level, and especially in this environment where you have a very successful president and you have the problem of bringing it against a woman. There is a double standard, and we all know it exists. So I guess we'll find out when they go to report, or if the grand jury determines that these allegations indeed rise to the level of bringing charges. So, yes.
I was just wondering, the people whose files were examined, were they ever notified of that?
Yes, the individuals were notified. Their files were brought over by the FBI. Our investigation did not find any direct use of the files, and that's clearly what we were looking at. The first thing that we asked was, we'd like the files fingerprinted, because we thought if these files have been used, there will be fingerprints on them. Well, we were told that when the files were collected to be given back to the criminal investigators to fingerprint them, that Craig Livingston gathered them all together and walked them back over. So there was a problem there. I'm not sure how that worked out. But we did not have proof that they were actually used. And so that was at the point the congressional investigator, Chairman Klinger, who I worked for, we realized that this was beyond our abilities in Congress and that it needed a criminal investigator with a grand jury power to look and see. And certainly we felt that the individuals whose files had been taken deserved that, to have some sort of feeling that in 10 years this information wasn't going to pop up. And part of our concern was, we knew there had been private investigators and opposition research individuals hired into the White House and that had helped on the campaign. I mean, one was Jack Palladino, who is an investigator on the West Coast. He indeed worked on the campaign and for other individuals. And so we felt as though we had a responsibility to assure the individuals whose files had been taken that this information wasn't going to be used for political or any other purposes. And so it sits over with the criminal independent counsel.
Have any of those individuals brought a lawsuit?
There are some lawsuits that have been brought, and they are now pending. We've been reading about them. Some of the problems that have happened with the lawsuits is the government is not cooperating, which is, I think, no surprise. The thing that they have finally done, though, is the government's failure to cooperate has really angered the judge, and he has come very close to holding the government in contempt and really giving the people, the plaintiffs bringing the action, a lot more leeway than they probably would have, because when you stonewall, destroy evidence against a congressional investigator, we have very few options. But when you do that against a federal judge, he has the option of contempt and jail. And so I think they have been reined in quite a bit by the judges, and it's still ongoing, trying to get the documents out of the government. Yes, sir.
There's a body of opinion which holds that Hillary Clinton doesn't now, nor ever had the intention of running for the Senate. That it was a very clever ruse to get Bill Clinton off the front page. And in light of the fact that the column mentions devoted to Bill Clinton, since she has alleged that she may run, what is your opinion?
Well, I think in the beginning, clearly, I mean, and that was an opinion, and it did get him off the front page, but no one would say that Hillary Clinton doesn't want to hold office herself and doesn't want to exercise power. I mean, this woman has paid her dues with her imperfect candidate for many years, and it has really been her work and her agenda that has got him reelected to the governorship. She brought in Dick Morris. She really brought in the individuals that saved him in Arkansas. And I think everybody would have to agree that he never would have made it to election night without her in 1993, that her 60 Minutes appearance had a huge effect. He did not go by the way of people such as Gary Hart because of the activities. And again, Hillary Clinton came forward in the Lewinsky matter. We now know that the Senate Democrats were very close to going to the White House, and that they were very close to calling for President Clinton to leave. Hillary Clinton was there. She was in the war room. She was steadfast. She was always determined that her candidate was going to survive. So I think that in dues paying in her mind has given her the right to run in her mind. And this was a perfect opportunity, being, once again, that it was from New York with a very broad agenda, very broad media attention. And perhaps after the last week, too much media attention for even her own comfort. Yes. Yes, sir.
Is it true, would you say it's true that the independent counsel, although Ken Starr has left, the office is still vital, and it could last past noon on January 20th, 2001?
Well, when Judge Starr left, Bobby Ray was appointed by the three-judge panel, and he is the independent counsel who has picked up the work. The benefit of having him was he was already on the team, so we didn't have to start all over, and he's continuing the work of that office. Even though the statute no longer exists, he is grandfathered, so to speak, and so that will continue until it reaches completion, until he either goes to report, the grand jury decides to return charges, or if the Attorney General decides to remove for cause. Yes, ma'am.
I wondered what your opinion was of Janet Reno's behavior through this whole thing.
Well, it was startling because I was lucky enough to be in the Department of Justice under Attorney General Meese, and I had watched other Attorney Generals bar when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was startling, her actions, and this is from the beginning. When Congress would make a valid request, that the Attorney General basically wouldn't demand compliance. Instead, we had executive privilege claims being given by the White House where the Justice Department was out of the loop in the beginning. The head of the Office of Legal Counsel, I called him because I had interned in that office and I knew that was their responsibility. He said, oh no, that's being done at the White House. Attorney General Reno really was unique, and she's continued to be that way with her testimony about the independent counsel statute and why certain counsels weren't appointed. The China investigation was an outrage, that you would have someone who was brought in in order to assure the public that there would be an independent investigation, and Charles LaBella recommended an independent counsel. The head of the FBI recommended an independent counsel, and none was appointed, and Mr. LaBella was sent away. That kind of thing used to rouse the public anger so much that no president would allow his Attorney General to do that to his presidency. Instead, we have had sort of complicit recalcitrance, and she has been very successful in the Senate. I mean, she goes up and testifies and just digs in her heels, and no matter what questions she's giving, she just sort of says, I'm not going to do it. And the senators are left with testimony that there's no action they feel they can take, although they do have an avenue. The Attorney General is impeachable and removable, but I think at this point, if you said that in the halls of Congress, you'd be thrown out. Yes, ma'am.
Since your opinion's unknown, has the wrath of Hillary touched you yet?
I think that's best left, but lest I give some suggestions to individuals who might be watching.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
If the wrath of Hillary Clinton or her administration had touched me, I mean, I think I said I wouldn't want to describe anything that might give new ideas. Yes, sir.
I think we all saw on television Cokie Roberts interviewing Robert Byrd, Senator Byrd. And Senator Byrd said he thought Bill Clinton was guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. Then he goes up on Capitol Hill and joins 29 other Democratic senators, including Senator Moynihan, and votes not guilty. How do you reconcile that?
Well, you don't. I mean, basically, I think it was a political decision. I mean, I think that not only did the senators decide that he was guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, and I think every senator there who really looked at the case knew it was true, but even more important is Judge Susan Weber Wright has found the president guilty of lying and obstruction of justice, a very serious charge for any lawyer, much less the President of the United States. So I think it's clear that they knew what was going on, but they made a political decision not to remove the president. We all saw the damage to the party after Watergate, and I think that they felt that they did not want to go through the years that the Republicans went through after Watergate. And once again, I come back to Hillary Clinton. I think she was immeasurably helpful to the president during those times. The fact that she was there, she was personally making calls to people involved in the impeachment and the removal process. She was an active participant. I think that went a long way to shore up fortitude by her party that normally you would never have. Most wives, I think, at that point, especially with the topic that was involved, would not even be in the same town.
Yeah, but where is the press all this time? I mean, they press, you know, Catherine Graham in the inner circle at the Washington Post was capable of removing Nixon from office. And that was based on a character like Deep Throat. And yet we can't remove this president.
Well, I mean, I think that we're clearly in a different environment. We're with a different party, and we all know that. And I think that is clear. And I think there just wasn't the will all around. I think this is a small town, and it operates as a small town. And there wasn't the political will, and I think the media decided they weren't going to go out on that limb. Everybody was just sort of waiting for the other. And it just, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who feel as though an injustice was done, but ultimately, once again, I go back to President Clinton will leave office, he will become a civilian. Decisions have to be made then when he's a civilian. And still right now with the Arkansas bar is whether he's going to remain a lawyer because of the charges by the judge. I think the process will work, and if nothing we get out of this process, and this is one of the reasons I wrote this book on Hillary, is I think we've now been in an environment with so much media that sometimes we think we have more facts. And we really, in a way, have less. We have more what Anita was talking about earlier when I did the thing on the spin. We have a lot of spin. We have war rooms that are giving us information and sometimes misinformation. And one of my points then was it wasn't spin, it was just out and out lies that we were getting from the spokesperson for the president. We, in some ways, have less facts because the facts that the power and the pulpit of the White House wants to get out sometimes crowd out all other information. And so I felt that it's important to get a book out, to have the facts in a single place about a person so that it can't be changed, it can't be spun. And I tried to back up my commentary and my views with evidence so that people could really say, well, here's the writing, here's the speeches, here's the work, respond to what your real position is, respond to your real views, and not just what your spokesperson wants to put out 24 hours later to make it sound good. Yes, ma'am.
Dick Morris recently called Hillary an anti-Semite, and I think nothing infuriates me more. One day she's calling for a Palestinian state, the next day she turns around and she has 1/1000 Jewish blood. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, she clearly went over there for political reasons. The papers over there said that she was over there as a candidate, and they knew it. And then she was shocked that they used her for political reasons. And it's sort of, the surprise was that she wasn't prepared for that. and that she couldn't handle it. And I think that was surprising, and it tells us a bit about Hillary Clinton. I think she's gotten so used to having an easy ride here. What you said about the press, certainly the First Lady has never been pressed. And one of the frustrating things about watching her on television is there's never a follow-up, or she just doesn't answer. It's off limits. And I think she got used to that and didn't realize, and she was completely used, and she reacted in the worst way possible to sit there and listen to that. But frankly, she also has talked both sides of the party. I mean, one day she is talking about a Palestinian state, and one day she is talking about the Capitol, and she's not consistent. And I think it's an area with New York politics. I lived there for a short period of time. You can't do that. This is a city that you have to take some positions, and it's a state that is tough, and they want answers. So I think she got used in a way that she thought she was going to use them. I mean, after all, she went to see Arafat to deliver $3.8 million in aid, and I think she thought it was going to be a great photo op. She had her photo op in Israel, and she didn't realize they were going to use her in the same way she was hoping to use them. Yes, ma'am.
You brought out very clearly that Hillary was a member of the deep left, of the far left, in the 60s, and I'm of the 60s generation, and I know what went on in that generation very well. And I have read Judge Bork's book, what is it? Slouching Toward Tomorrow, in which you'll find very good analysis of what the left was really like. So that's a very serious accusation that we're making against Hillary, and I wonder, is there, I mean, when those people on the far left in the 60s definitely had parts of America that they really hated, things about our society that they really hated. And in your research, have you found that there are some things with which Hillary might be angry or really basically hates in our society?
Well, I mean, she's always said that she feels that government can do a job better. I mean, when it comes up in privatizing any of our government programs, Hillary is very against that, and she always has the view, and this has been very consistent, that the government can do anything better. And indeed, when we talk about business coming in and helping out in the welfare area, education, Hillary is a believer in government. And that's why I talked about the area of the children, because I think that's a wonderful example that she's written extensively. She's had a very consistent position, is that this is not to help children's lives be better. This is to bring the government into our families so it has more control. Similarly, I feel that way about after-school care. When Hillary says the most important crisis in America is that our children aren't taken care of until 6 or 8 o'clock at night, I disagree. I mean, I think that we should be spending time figuring out how to make life and the economy work so that parents can stay home with their children, not so that the government needs to take them. And it's a whole different way of looking at the world, and her view is very consistent. I mean, one of the things, she wants to expand welfare and Social Security with no reform. It should just grow. She talked about institutionalized medicine without really understanding what is this going to do to our medical system. How is it going to undermine the quality of care we have? Instead, it's just more, and I think that is one of the consistent patterns you find. This did come from the left. It came from very early on when she's reading works such as Robert Boers, the Truhoffs, when she's reading Jessica Mitford, who's passed on, who was a Stalinist, when she's studying under Stahl-Alinsky, Carl Oglesby, who was a Marxist. I mean, the writings of these individuals were in a magazine that's called Motive Magazine that Hillary said in '92 she still has every copy and she reads. That is why I said this was not a passing fancy. And this is not a woman that anyone would say has passing fancies. She is very serious. She is very committed. If you look in Arkansas what she was doing to the education system, it's very consistent. It's not a young frolic 30 years ago that perhaps she's being maligned with. And indeed, if she wants to change her policies, I think she needs to describe them. I think she needs to come out and explain them, because she has had an effect. This is not a first lady who has just sat there. This is a First Lady who's been very critical, and certainly the first years of the Clinton administration, she sat in on senior cabinet meetings. She was at the first Camp David meeting. She was sitting there making policy. Bill Clinton admitted that he went to her for policy. So we know that she's very intimately involved in these issues. Because the American public was looking at Clinton as a weak man because she was so involved in policy, Dick Morris told her to back off and become the first advocate, stop doing policy. So she did. She stopped attending meetings, but I don't think anyone believes that she pulled back from her beliefs and her ideals, which she's extremely dedicated to. Yes?
I wondered if you were aware that regarding Hillary's trip to Israel and the silence with Mrs. Arafat, that Democrats are now saying, oh, she was there in her capacity as a first lady, not as a candidate. That's how they're defending her. And I wondered if you thought that this kind of thing is going to continue over the next year. That's my first question. My second question is, do you have any idea what Hillary really thinks about the Juanita Broderick situation? Do you think anyone will ever ask?
No, I mean, that's something that, one can't even imagine. I do know that in the research, it's clear that Hillary Clinton knew of the president's actions going back into Arkansas, that she was well aware that he was not faithful before they were married, after they were married. This has continued. She's known about it. She indeed hired a private investigator back in Arkansas to find out who the women were. And once again, it reminds me of a campaign manager who has, like I said, an imperfect candidate that you keep having to protect and figure out how to defend. But the Juanita Broderick was so shocking. The only statement was a report that when Juanita Broderick saw Hillary at a fundraiser, that there was an exchange of looks that she felt that Hillary was well aware and still remained the campaign manager. I didn't find anything. I don't think it's something she probably talks about very often. And I think her answer for most of those is a vast right-wing conspiracy. And it's the perfect technique to get the focus off the issue. And that's really been very successful. And you find that one of the things Saul Alinsky says is, attack your attacker. Use their momentum against them. And it's real interesting. He says ridicule is man's most potential weapon. And so that's what Hillary does and a lot of the individuals who have been in her war room. They really go seek and destroy the accuser. And it's worked very well. So I think that's what she focuses on. And I think her pursuit of the ends always justify the means, and she feels that her ends of socialized government for this country justifies any means, obviously. Yes?
The first question is about Hillary choosing to be the first lady or the candidate.
Yeah, and you're right. Hillary Clinton, you were talking about her trip, and they said she was going as the First Lady. Hillary Clinton issued a statement that this is an official visit, I'm going as the First Lady. And then almost as if people didn't believe her, the next line, it's a totally official visit. And I mean, everyone knows that the numbers in New York are not going well for Hillary Clinton. Everyone knows that the Democratic Party considers the Jewish vote to be their ownership in New York, and that if you don't get 2/3 of the vote in the city, you are going to have an impossible road to hoe in the state. She was at 44%, the last numbers. She's gone right around 44 to 50%. Those are not good numbers, and I think she thought this was an excellent opportunity to get those numbers up while she's First Lady, while she can still do that, and it clearly backfired. I think it's a natural tension when you're a First Lady and a candidate, but she has exploited it to the point where the 51, and I think that she's had 51 foreign trips as First Lady, and they've been 32, I believe, have been without the president. It's just mind-boggling numbers and travels and the amount of money that's been spent that she's taken advantage of it and has never looked back or explained. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Janet Reno as another politician that has used children as a way to increase political power, both in Waco and in Dade County, Florida. How widespread, well, how cynical is this? In your book, you seem to imply that Hillary's oblivious to the implications for political use of children. But how cynical is this throughout the administration, not just...
Well, I mean, I think Hillary's very aware of how she's using children, and I think it's worked. I think anyone is. I mean, Hillary knows that her programs, that she can look at a Republican and say, I want this regulation against pollution because it makes children breathe better, and that if the Republican says, no, it's a bad regulation, it harms our economy, it harms businesses, that the next line is going to be, well, you're against the children and you're hard-hearted and don't care. So cynically, I think that it's been a very, very convenient vehicle and it's been used. And I don't think it's a lack of understanding of that. I think it's just a horrible way to use something that we all can relate to, that every one of us does want our future generation to be better for children. And indeed, my book, the first chapter, I open it up with a chapter called Hillary's Baby. And back in '96, when the poll numbers were tanking on the Clintons, we started hearing that the Clintons were going to have an empty nest and they were going to adopt a child, which was a very wonderful thing to hear. And I thought, gee, you know, this is going to be a child brought into the White House. What an amazing life. Well, the poll numbers came up, the child was out, and we never heard another word. So when you talk about cynicism, I think that's pretty out there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, I'm one of the few people who doesn't believe that Hillary will run, and particularly with George Stephanopoulos' recent spin about how New York Democrats went around in the race. I was just curious how you feel. Do you think she'll continue?
I've spoken to several individuals that are in the caucus. I mean, I guess it's wonderful being on TV shows because they do talk to you afterwards. And it said that Hillary has looked at him point blank and say, I'm running. Now, I don't put it past her to lie, but I do. I mean, I think right now, you know, candidates become sort of intoxicated with the crowds, and she's had wonderful, wonderful reception. And I think she intends to run, but her negatives are so high right now. If a candidate has a lot of undecided voters, or even if voters are for the other candidate, you can battle that. You can go out and run a good campaign. Her negatives are incredibly high, and by negatives I mean polls of voters who say they strongly dislike her and would never vote for her for any reason, and that's a problem. And I think with people in her campaign such as Harold Ickes and others who are so experienced, they've told her, put it off till January or March, and perhaps you'll have a better picture of what the numbers look like and whether you have a chance. And it's all's not lost, though. She clearly has established herself apart from her husband as the First Lady. She's established herself as a candidate in her own right. And if she can stay on her listening tour, she's not had to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just don't understand where the outrage is here. Here's a woman who spent millions and millions of dollars of our money, which she doesn't have to account for. I have a friend at USTR who tells me it's $1 million every time she goes on one of these trips. She takes 100 people with her. It's never written up except this latest incident. I don't know what she says on these trips. Where's the outrage? I mean, what is her job that she's allowed to do this? She's the First Lady, but she's making policy, which is against the law. I mean, why is Nancy Reagan went on 3 trips, one of which was to the royal wedding, so we can call it 2 trips, and she was criticized by the press. She never went on another one because she said it cost too much money for her to travel without the president, $750,000, I think she said. It's well over $1 million, according to a friend of mine who should know.
Well, I mean,
it's never talked about.
Well, I mean, we could go all night with examples of double standards, certainly from the earlier administrations. I mean, everyone remembers when Mrs. Reagan got in this huge flap over wearing a borrowed dress to a state dinner. And the first thing I saw Hillary Clinton was in a designer Donna Karan standing at the table. And it didn't seem to matter. I mean, you know, we are in a different environment. We have got different standards that are being furthered, and I think there should be outrage because the press does work hand in hand with the public. And one of the purposes of this book is to put the facts there. When they're spun wrong or when there is misinformation, people can go back to it and say, no, explain this. If you think this is not correct, you wrote this. Talk about this. This is your policy. This is what you did in Arkansas. You took credit for this. And I think it does go hand in hand with the outrage of the public incites the press to go further, and they have really been beaten up. I mean, we all know that the only people thought of lower than lawyers is the media. And I think there's an effect there, that unless the American people really say, we want our paper to report on what's happening, we want our paper to talk about ethics rules, and we're not going to chide them when they go back to old rules that other administrations have to follow. And it's sort of the egg and the chicken problem that we're in right now. Hopefully, what we've learned is in a new administration, voters are going to be much more careful with what they do, and they're not going to take just what they're told. They're going to really look at a candidate, and they're going to spend a lot more time and demand more of the media to give them serious background stories and serious insights into the candidates. And certainly, if any president says it's 2 for 1, then they're going to have to do double the investigation. One more. Yes, ma'am.
If she decides not to run, what legally can she do with the money that she's raised? And what happens to the candidate who then runs? How are they going to raise money when she's already done all this fundraising?
Well, technically, if she decides not to run, the money is hers as long as she has not become an official candidate. As long as it's in her exploratory. But I think what's even more interesting is if Hillary Clinton pulls out of the race, I think there's plenty of time for an appointment from the president. And I do think that a position in foreign policy such as the UN or the World Bank, something that doesn't require Senate confirmation, because I don't think she wants to sit down with Jesse Helms, but I think there's plenty of time for an appointment in the foreign policy position. I think she has every intention of running in 2004, which is also why I discuss in my book that she doesn't mind at all that she's vacuuming up all the money that would otherwise go to Al Gore. If Al Gore loses in 2000, it's a much cleaner shot for her. I do think that's in her picture. There's an exploratory committee that's going on, and I think she's looking for the kinds of qualifications that would make her a viable candidate. And so I think that's even more important. And one of the things I realized when people said, why would she run if she loses, she's finished? Well, never count out Hillary Clinton. If she loses in November, there's 3 months before Bill Clinton leaves the White House. Thank you all very much. I appreciate
it. Barbara is at her current firm here in Washington. She was hired as a stand-up lawyer, but she's done a lot of standing tonight, and she's ready to sit down and sign some books. And thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Barbara.
Veritas and your name. Veritas.
And how do I spell the last name?
No, just Veritas, true.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do I spell that?
Veritas.
Thank you.
Veritas.
Now I should know what that means.
True.
Verified, but Veritas. Okay, of course. Thank you. You know, when your book comes out, you lose your brain as well. It's like you pour it in there, hopefully it'll come back. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming.
Hi.
Hello.
I was a Wellesley College graduate. My advisor was Hillary Clinton's advisor for political science. And I thought it was funny that I thought I'd tell you, while she was at Wellesley, she was the president of the Wellesley College Republicans.
Yes. Well, it was odd because one of the things she did was, in the very beginning, she was sort of a John Lindsay Republican. And I talk, you see it in my book, and that she came down as an internship and was at the House Republican Policy and had become sort of a Rockefeller Republican and then just
flipped over, right?
Republicans are evil and must die.
Can you write yeah, actually, I was the only Republican in my dorm 1 year. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, and I made it out alive. Can you write to
Wellesley.
Jim Sanders.
Oh, dear.
S-A-N-D-E-R-S?
I'd love to go back and get some old newspapers, get the Globe or the Herald, and find out what they reported on that speech.
Thank you for giving your daughter good value.
I heard it was very, very long. And
Oh, she.
Thanks for giving your daughter
Well,
good value.
she just ripped, insulted Ed Brooke, and you just, I mean, just don't do that to a U.S. senator, no matter what his.
when you have a colossal ego
What did
like
she
that.
say about Brooke? I've never seen the speech.
I think she just basically criticized him in general for on just, you know, a lot of it was the Vietnam War and just everything that she could be concerned about. You know, I can't think of the exact phrase.
And then on this one, that one's to me. Could you write
So, well,
to Susan
you just
Sanders?
don't know very much, you know, something like that.
And then I like that Veritas. That is nice. Yeah, that was good. Thank you very much. It was a
And
pleasure meeting you. I really
congratulations.
enjoyed it.
You know, is your thesis under seal? You know, her thesis is under seal. I tried getting.
Oh, really?
Oh, they put it under seal after Clinton was elected.
Oh, I wonder
one's
if I
ever
could
read
get
it.
a hold of it. He was
If you
my
ever do,
advisor.
come back
It's
here.
upside down.
Yeah, if you ever do. If you ever do. It was put under seal.
You know what, though? Because mine's not. I know that
No,
mine's
they just
not.
did. They said they would put
Because
all
she's-
first ladies under seal.
Really?
Because Saul Alinsky helped her with it, and I think they decided it was explosive. And one of the people said, well, one of the professors said she was writing about Johnson's Great Society and how it didn't go far enough, and that the people who are the beneficiary of the program should actually manage the programs. And I think the university thought, uh-oh.
Barbara Olson has been Chief Investigative Counsel to the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight and served as Principal Assistant General Counsel and Solicitor to the House. Her book, Hell to Pay, is published by Regnery Publishing Incorporated.